We do have Ms. Cheryl Heads presenting on nonprofit compliance and grant reporting. Cheryl Heads is a nonprofit consultant and donor advisor. She conducts research, measurement, comparative analysis, and evaluations of giving programs. In addition, she prepares guidelines, writes RFPs. We've been writing some of those, correct? So we're going to get some great information on those requests for proposals. Reviews proposals, conducts site visits, disperses funds, so we'd be excited to see you coming, and ensure appropriate expenditures. Prior to her work as a consultant, Cheryl is a senior program officer at Field Foundation of Illinois, where she is responsible for reviewing, evaluating, and making recommendations regarding grant requests received by the foundation from Chicago area nonprofit organizations operating in the general fields of health, education, urban and community affairs, welfare, culture, and environment. Did everybody in the room pick up on one of those? Okay. Prior to that, she served as grants manager at the Brinson Foundation. Her responsibilities included the initial review and evaluation of preliminary grant seekers, inquiries, oversight of the foundation's grant management processes and softwares, and monitoring grant-making deadlines and reporting requirements to ensure consistent grant processing. She served 3 years on the interim executive committee of the Chicago African American in Philanthropy and 3 years on the board of directors of Chicago Women in Philanthropy. Please help me welcome Ms. Cheryl Heads.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, wonderful. I hope your energy level is still up. Yes. I like to think they save the best for last, but I'm sure that doesn't have anything to do with it. I think it's more about the nonprofit compliance and grant reporting, which is taking everything that you've learned today and bringing it all together and now reporting it back, which is an important part of what you do and the work that you're doing. I'll wait just for a few seconds that you have the handout as we go through the presentation. First, I know you've probably been introducing yourselves all day, but I ask that you do it one more time, and so we can get a chance to know each other. So write down names if you see somebody, you're like, oh, I forgot his name, and it would be helpful to me as well so that I can get to know you and where you are in your organization. We're going to start with introductions. That's the first thing. Your name, organization, your organization's mission, and I want you to brag a bit too. I mean, this is about Powerhouse. So I want you to share a skill, a powerhouse skill that you have that you think you're good at. So I'll start. Just to kind of get things rolling, my name is Cheryl Heads. My organization is Cheryl Heads Consulting. I work with nonprofit organizations, helping them build their capacity. In addition, I work with donors who are interested in investing in community-based nonprofits and bringing the two together. Brag a bit about my powerhouse skill. My powerhouse skill is listening. I mean, it's very important in what I do to hear about other people and where they're coming from so that I can pounce on the information that they give me, particularly with donors, and knowing that I can build that relationship between donors and interested grantees. So if you would like to start us off, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. My name is Camille C. Miller. I'm the director of Boom Squad Incorporated. We are a youth development organization located in Evansville, Indiana. Our public face is a performing drum line. That is what we use. That's the vehicle we use to get the kids in the organization. We do things, we perform at halftime shows, sporting events, parades. We've been in Bud Billington several times. We performed well. We've been called by the Chicago Bulls, but we didn't have enough money to get up here to perform. But we perform regularly for the NBA, Indiana Pacers, WNBA, Indiana Fever. My bragging point is when we get kids in, we do things like make them go to academic time and mentoring. We give life skills. We teach kids how to set a table, that kind of thing. My work really doesn't start until our event at the at the Boom Squad Inn. So we work together, play together, we fix cars together, we raise each other's kids together. I guess my bragging point would be that we have a 100% graduation rate. We have a 62% college entrance rate and a 16% college graduation rate. We have kids on drum lines at Purdue, Indiana State, Tuskegee, Lincoln University, Murray State University. And most of the kids we work with are considered at risk. Our general population, we work with kids that have approximately a 38% dropout rate. My first college graduate, not high school, my first college graduate was a high school dropout. That's what we do.
All right. Okay, and if you just want to brag about you per se, what would you say your powerhouse skill is? Like, yeah, this is me.
I happen to be an attorney, a criminal defense attorney. I was a former prosecutor, and I keep all my kids out of trouble.
All right.
They can take it down. I'm the first number to call.
Okay, next.
Oh, wow. All of that? Eric K. Williams is my name. Empowerment Resources International is my company. I'm an advisor. We work in the nonprofit space, really bringing benefits. The unique part about our benefits is we show you how to grow your money without risking it, being it to death and losing it. We also will match your contributions if you're staff or yourself or contributing something. We can match it up to 8%. In reference to, okay, so that's me.
Yeah, your organization.
I guess my powerhouse story is I have over 600 clients. I have many people's life savings, and none of my clients have lost a penny.
All right.
Okay, here at Clark, I'm with Chicago Digital Access Alliance and Connect Woodlawn Inc. I do a lot of things, but in this room today, I'm with Chicago Digital Access Alliance and Connect Woodlawn Inc. We're 12 years old. Most of the things that you heard about in the city in terms of digital excellence, you heard that term. We created it. We were the group that put together the whole, digital excellence, smart community type stuff that we've seen at the Chicago Community Trust and all that. All of that came out of a 2007 meeting with the MacArthur Foundation that we conducted with Julia Stash, who's a great friend of mine. And since then, we've been the advocates within community for digital excellence, digital literacy, and also digital inclusion. Some of you may have heard about the Wi-Fi network over the years that is in Chicago. We're creating that in Woodlawn. We were part of the first cohort with the University of Chicago Community Programs Accelerated, which I know this young lady was part of, well, the first cohort. And, I think my claim to fame is that I can take hard stuff and make it simple.
Yes, all right. Okay.
Good afternoon, I'm Kelly Fair. I'm the founder and executive director of College Pebbles Girls Mentoring Program. We like to say at College Pebbles, we've been helping girls shine since 2009. And we do that by creating communication competencies and mentoring initiatives that help ensure the employability of girls in the future workplace. In almost 9 years, we've served close to 2,500 girls in 75 public schools, charter schools, and public housing communities in Chicago, in Northwest Indiana, we've been in Texas, and then to continue to find the need for structure and mentoring initiatives, we created a college pilot of College Pebbles a couple of years ago at Duke University, serving young women of color who are undergraduate students. And so we've been awarded a 3rd-year contract with the college edition and actively looking to continue to expand that pilot into community colleges. So
wonderful. One
of my superpowers is I will tell you what we need and put it out there. So there's plenty of people in this room who are connected to community colleges. And so if you'd like to stop by and talk to me afterwards, I love to network. I love to find opportunities within my organization. My job is not just to impact girls, but it's to impact people in the community who want to have a place and a space and impacting the outcomes, positive outcomes of young people. So I invite you to come over, and there's some place and some space that we can find for you to contribute to College Pebbles Girls Mentoring Program.
Wonderful.
I'm Christine Wardlaw. That is told Ms. Smith. I'm using my real name again. For years I used the name Vera, but my mother reminded me She named me Darylstein for a reason. I am the founder and executive director of Connections to the Future that I founded when I retired from Chicago Public Schools. People ask me, where did I teach? I said everywhere. What did I teach? I said everything. Because I started in primary grades, became a special ed educator, and retired as a school administrator. I think I've been all over the city. Connections to the Future was founded because as an educator, I observed that elementary school students were entering high school unprepared to be successful in high school. And that is what Connections to the Future does. We work with elementary school students, and for the past 5 years, we've done a summer camp. My powerhouse brag
Yes.
is one of my students who've been with me for 3 years said to me last year, and if I could have translated it into money, I wouldn't need a dime. She said, Miss Pie, that's what my campus called me, because some of them know my grandchildren, and my grandchildren named me Miss Pie. Miss Pie, I like this camp because you make us respect each other. I think that answers it all.
Yes, yes it does. Yes. Okay, I know we're kind of running. I wish I had all day to do this because this is what I enjoy doing the most, but if we can just kind of move it along a little bit, you know, get those stories in so then we can move forward. And I want to try to get you guys out of here on time.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for giving me this Kanye West moment.
Not Kanye, that'll take all day.
I'm in a fucking place right now, so my name is LaKendrick Williams. I work with the National Cares Mentor Movement on a volunteer capacity to recruit able, stable, and caring adults, as I shared before, right? But I guess my moment of bragging is the fact that last year was a difficult year working for Northrop Grumman simply because I'm fearless in the sense of believing what it is that I want to accomplish, right? And so I realized and I recognize that in working for Northrop Grumman, we have an opportunity to pour into the community and to leverage resources and company dollars. I told Brother 20K earlier, but it's actually 15K a year that Northrop Grumman disseminates into the community for students to participate in a STEM program called the High School Involvement Program, right? And so traditionally they focus on just the white school, I'm just gonna be frank, right? And so being in a leadership capacity last year, I went into a meeting, I was told no many times that we couldn't focus on the south side of Chicago, you know, our folks. And you know, after a lot of back and forth, I was able to get 2 students from Harlan High School, and the National Cares actually underwrote the cost of transportation every single month for them to work with engineers at Northrop Grumman. After they go through the 2-year program, they go on to college. We pay for their college $60K per student, and they get a yearly annual internship with the company. After that, they go on to become one of our professional development scholars, right? They rotate, and from there they become direct hire. So that's my moment of pride.
That's a wonderful moment. Thank you. Thank you.
It's about the 3rd time I did this, but
third but last.
So my name is Darius Ballinger. Maybe I'll take this time to expound on what Chasing 23 is, because I've said it more than once. Back in 2013, I lost one of my friends to a domestic violence incident. And at the time of his passing, I was a high school dropout, I was a convicted felon, and I was a teenage father. Since then, I went on to community college. I'm now at a 4-year university, earning a bachelor's degree in entrepreneurship. I took what street savvy smarts that I had to do the wrong thing, to start a non-profit organization to help young brothers transfer those skills on the block into steady employment. And then I've also been the father, luckily to be the father of 3 sons and a husband to a beautiful wife for the past 3 years. So if it was a bragging point or anything that I could share, is I'll say that God chose me. He literally pulled me out of my situation and told me to go back and do something.
Hey everybody, I am Patricia Brantley. I am a case manager with the Maywood American Job Center. One of the businesses that I am working on myself is a Voice in the Wilderness Workforce Center. Currently, my current position as a case manager, basically what it is that we do, we help individuals with employment opportunities and or vocational training. The company again that I work for is Maywood American Job Center. Today, we have helped over 95,000 people find suitable employment, and I would say that my power moment is basically to uplift, encourage, and motivate.
All right.
My name is Norma Roseman, and I have a degree in psychology and social behavior, and I've been mentoring substance abuse, people with substance abuse problems for the last 36 years. And I guess you could say my powerhouse is being able to hear people, what they are saying, and not reinterpret what they're saying.
Yes.
So I want to take that powerhouse and use to start some grief counseling for families and children, because it seems to be with everything that's going on with the violence these days, that seems to be a missing component. I never hear anything about us getting actual counseling, so I'd like to do that.
Okay.
That's why I'm here today.
Is anyone else would like to share? Or? Okay.
My name is Sharada Hudson. I don't currently have an organization yet, but I'm trying to actually start one. My mission for that will be to get our not just young black men, but our black men as a whole being in control of their households again, back and employed, feeling good about themselves. And I'm going to partner with this too, because he's been there, done that, and he's part of an organization that will actually help me do that. And my powerhouse would probably be motherhood.
All right. Yes.
I've raised 3 wonderful, strong children. I have twin boys and a daughter. They are fierce and doing something with their lives, not in trouble. And I kick their butt every day. Every day.
All right.
That's my thing. Just being a great mom and not giving up and keeping my foot in their neck.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. And all right. So, anyone else? Okay. Sure. All right. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Tony White. I am the organizer of Good Life Foundation, and what we do is we support individuals who have a disability after they finish with school. My powerhouse skill would probably be the same as you, being a mother. The doctors told me my son would never have a normal life, and the fact that I believe in his ability versus his disability is why I feel like I'm successful in what I do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And of course, during this process, some of the goals for this workshop, for this period, I want to make sure we have a general understanding on page 2, a general understanding of the needs of good record keeping as it relates to nonprofit compliance and filing requirements to maintain your nonprofit organization and federal tax exempt status. And secondly, basic understanding of various methods to create a culture of learning at your organization in order to prepare for grant reporting. So listening to your stories, I can hear the passion. I can hear it. It's just fantastic. Okay, now I have 2 pictures here. The first picture, it says help. How many people can relate to that as in terms of compliance reporting and nonprofit compliance? It's paperwork, etc. How many people can relate to that experience? Like, because we're about passion. I mean, we start nonprofits because we care and we're servants. But we have to also realize that we have to have the paperwork to back it up, and it's just a necessary thing that we have to do. So hopefully this workshop will get you from the help picture number one and get you to helping you where you feel like you have a thumbs up and you have a better grasp on your paperwork and the necessary things that you need. So when you say that you feel like the number one picture, the help, what are some of the constraints that you feel when in terms of doing paperwork? Is it the time constraints of having to then shift from that passion and serving your participants and serving your clients to having to shift that energy to filling out forms, triplicate, duplicate, trying to understand the process? Is it a staff constraint? Do you have enough people on board to do those things? Can anybody speak to what some of the constraints are in terms of, yeah?
I believe it goes back to not really just having the bandwidth nor the staff. So I believe it's a combination of both.
Okay.
That leads one to be somewhat frustrated with the process.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
I can say, I can talk to my clients all day. But when I know that now I gotta go in there and each individual, maybe case note files or fill out forms and you have deadlines, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Is to close the gap between when we're doing stuff on the grant development side and making sure my day-to-day people who are doing the direct service and who are managing the direct service understand what the grant says and what we say we're going to do, and making sure that they are educated on that so that they can help fulfill it and make it manifest on the day-to-day direct service side. I realize that it's been too much of a gap.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. So if we go to page 3 and we talk about nonprofit, continue to talk about nonprofit compliance, and we talk about the need for a record keeping. It really is important for you to be able to keep this information at hand. I know it's difficult. If we can think of instances where we can have that information on hand and work on it and set aside some time to do it. I mean, these are some of the reasons why it's necessary. I mean, it helps you with your filing. It helps you with your, if you have to file a 990 and you're trying to pull all that information together. Even if you think about doing, even if you think about doing an annual report, you'll have that information there. But it's also important because if ever there's a suspect of improprieties or at the organization, you have that information on hand to say not so fast. Or if you suspect somebody in your organization, you have that paperwork to back it up. So I can't express strong enough how important record keeping is for your organization and the need to be able to pull it all together, especially when in terms of when my area of expertise is in grant making. When you're going out and you're trying to seek funding, funders want to see that you do have that bandwidth to not only have the passion for your clients, but to also have a passion for your organization and have a well-run organization as well. So it's just important in that process, especially if you're going to start seeking grants from foundations, because they're incredibly competitive. And the better you can make your organization look, the higher your chances are to getting that award of a grant. So we talk about the 990. I don't know if you all remember, if you were around when a few years back, a lot of organizations lost their tax exempt status because they hadn't been filing their forms on time. I think it was upwards of 30,000 organizations just involuntarily dissolved. And you'd hate to see that happen to you just in terms of paperwork and trying to get your paperwork out. Some of the other things that you want to take into consideration when you're talking about nonprofit compliance is to have your bylaws, your organization. These govern your organization. How many people who have organizations, constantly check their bylaws and make sure that they're intact and they're ready and available to run your organization and govern your organization by your bylaws. They're very important for you to have those. Board meetings. How many people have a board where they hold at least once a year for their board meetings? Okay, that's great. And it's recommended that you do it more often, maybe quarterly. or some people hold them monthly. There are various committees that can be on your board. You can have a governance committee. So you put your board members to work so they can help you increase your bandwidth so that you're able to put them to work, so you're able to do the paperwork and everything that's required of you. On to page 4, we talk about nonprofit compliance continuing. These are some of the ones that I, as a foundation program officer, these are the ones that I would run into frequently. The 990, the federal form 990, and there people who didn't know, oh, are we required to have a 990 at certain levels? If you were under $50,000, you still are required to have to do a 990N for 200,000 to 500,000, less than 500,000, you're 990EZ. And then anything where your receipts are greater than 200,000 or your assets are greater than 500,000, you are definitely required to do a 990. So we would see at the foundation, we would see people coming in and they didn't have their 990 prepared, et cetera. And these are the types of instances where when you're trying to compete for grants from a foundation, and you know it's other people who have it, so then you'll automatically limited resources, so we have to cut you here or something like that. Another instance would be the annual report. I had instances where people forgot to file their annual report with the Attorney General's office, state of Illinois. You have to do that every year. There would be nonprofit organizations, and then we check that. We just go on the website, the state of Illinois website. We can check to see if you have your annual report, your filing, you've done your filings, and then that would be an automatic decline, unfortunately, for foundations. And a question we always would get was an audit. Are you required to have an audit? How many people here are actually required to have an audit? It's usually the requirement comes from the state of Illinois. It's not a federal requirement. Some grants from federal grants do require you to have an audit over 500,000. So it depends. But for the state of Illinois, you are required to have an audit, an independent audit done if you make over 300,000. I would recommend, even if you're making $200,000 annually, to have an independent audit done of your books. If not, then you have your unaudited financial statements that you can also provide, just as long as they're straightforward. Presentation is everything. So those are some of the nonprofit compliances in terms of annual reports. Are there any questions regarding compliance at this point? And before I move on to grant reporting. Okay, grant reporting. Usually the grant maker, the organization, will have their requirements. They're listed on their website, et cetera, what they require in terms of grant reporting. But generally speaking, there are just a few things like grant reporting: your financial statements, your budget, your profit and loss statement, your balance sheet, budgets for the organization, as well as budgets for a project. Those are some of the financial requirements for grant reporting. And then there also, you report on your impact projects, your lessons learned, and a sustainability plan. If you get a grant, the foundation is going to want to know we're just temporary funders. We're not long-term funders. So what's going to happen after we leave, say after a year or 2 years or 3 years? So it's important for you to provide that information about a sustainability plan. How do you plan on keeping the programs going after the foundation has moved on? And this takes into consideration a diversification of your revenue stream. Things like, you have your special events, you have corporate, you have other types of grant making as well. But at this point, I would also like to stress creating a culture of learning at your organization. And that's very important, and it's important in terms of your reporting. I mean, that's going to be helpful. So not just, here we help our client, et cetera, but also to think about what are we learning? What are our strengths, our weaknesses? Is this working for us? Is this not working? Does this need to be tweaked? So can anybody here consider themselves having a culture of learning? And some of the things would be like working with the university partner, Polished Pebbles. I'm not sure, did you work with the University of Chicago at some point, or kind of, sort of, having a university partner? Sometimes it can be a little tricky, but that could be when they're evaluating your programs. I don't know if you want to speak on that.
Graduate assistant support, intern support was something that they were very consistent with. So I think that would be something that I would definitely report out and help us build our capacity.
Yeah. Surveys, focus groups, and collecting stories from your participants. I mean, that's a culture, that's building that culture of learning. And I think foundations, as we try to figure out, when we talk more about impact and what does that look like, and can we really gauge impact? And, as we grapple with that question, I mean, I think that when you're creating this culture of learning at your organization where you're talking with your board, you're sharing your data with your staff, everybody's involved in this. And then we want to talk about the whole issue of failure and failing forward. I mean, sometimes failure can be a tricky proposition, but you can learn just as much from failure. And I think the foundation community and the grant making community is starting to understand this, particularly as more tech money comes into the sector. Tech founders are just, they are fantastic. I mean, they build failure into their programs. I mean, they get excited about failure because they know that they can learn from it. And as we pick up on that in our community, in this sector, the nonprofit sector, where you don't have to be afraid of failure because there's just as much information that you can learn from that, and you can share that information with people and with the grant, with the grant maker. I think that's important as well. So I don't know, can anybody speak to any issues that they've had with trying to, where they failed at something and then being, branded like, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore, but where people have embraced that in your organization? Can you speak to that? Okay. Well, I think it's something to keep on the radar. It's something to not be afraid of. And I think more and more organizations are starting to try and understand that, particularly as we talk about impact. Because we know impact is truly difficult to gauge. I mean, and I think as we struggle with it in the foundation community, we know that we need to start failing forward more and hearing those stories. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the example we had is that we worked to get our girls, our high school girls, summer job. I want to say about 2 years ago, we did a really nice job at getting us a sizable amount. So next summer, we were like, oh, we'll double that, And then I think there were challenges, not just within our organization, but in our partner organizations as well. So it gave us the insight to come back the next year to talk about how we needed funding for additional mentorship of the girls. All the things that we needed more of to better do what we needed to do.
Wonderful. Glad to hear that. Okay, so I got to speed along here, but just providing some terminology, especially when you're talking about grant reporting, it can get a little confusing. So, if everybody's speaking the same language and understanding the terms, the same terms and using the same definitions for those terms, when you talk about input and output and outcomes and impact and indicators and strategies, just trying to, as foundations grapple with this and trying to get them to back off and say, we're not counting widgets, we're counting human beings, and to get them to understand that. And you may not be able to see impact for years. It won't come in a nice, neat one-year packet. And you may not be able to gauge it for some organizations can't gauge their impact for 10 to 20 years. And helping, and the more we beat that drum and to get foundation community to understand that, the better off we'll all be as a sector and stronger we'll be as a sector. Some of the other things that, just in terms of grant making, just to kind of throw these things out there, a theory of change, a logic model, or some other ways of evaluating and keeping up with your record keeping and getting to getting to really understand your organization and what you're doing and how you're performing. The difference between the two really is that the theory of change, you sort of work backwards. You start with your intended impact and then work backwards, whereas with a logic model, you start with the strategy, if we do this, then that, and more information on that. Okay. And finally, just some resources on page 6 that you can use. Some of the information that I found were on the IRS website, the Secretary of State's website, the Attorney General's office. There's a best practice at Forefront, which is our nonprofit community organization, and then learning more about theory of change and grant making. So does anybody have any questions? And my information is there. So if I skipped anything, please feel free to reach out to me. It's no problem. All right. All right. Okay.
Before we adjourn, we have the pleasure of having closing remarks from Mr. Jackson.
I just want to say it's been a powerhouse day for me. I've learned a lot, and I will seek to go forward and fail. All right, and I think that Gloria and Natalie have a few words.
I just want to say thank you to all of you all for coming. Thank you to Philip for letting me work with Black Star. And thank you for Gloria for having put up with me.
For those of you who don't know, she's also a cousin. So, no. And I want to thank my sister, too, because she came in from Houston to be with Philip for the last couple of weeks and just kind of make sure that he gets the care that he needs. Thank you all for being here. I hope you learned something. Yeah, all right. It was fun. We'll be doing more things here at Black Star, and thank you for coming all the way from Indianapolis. No, Evansville. Okay, I got family down in Evansville. 5 hours, yes, sir. Hey, thank you. Thank you for coming.
I read about it in one of the black newspapers there.
All right, all right. So thank you all. We'll see you next time.